people keep sending me these texts and these takes, and they're asking me my opinions on, well, if Trump, if we move in as the United States, if we move into Greenland, that could signal the end of NATO. I simply ask the people who send me these videos, what year do you live in? NATO ended over 2 years ago. See, there was always only two sides to the Ukraine conflict, and there can only be one survivor. It was NATO versus the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation is intact. NATO losing to the Russians defeats the purpose of NATO. You have to understand the entire purpose of NATO was just to surround Russia, keep them in check, and then to eventually invade and break apart the Russian Federation. They failed. They've also demilitarized the entire European, all of NATO has been demilitarized simply because, for some odd reason, they listened to the Biden administration when they gave them orders to send all of their ammo, planes, tanks. Remember the Leopards? Remember the HIMARS? Remember the dirty bombs? They sent everything to the Ukraine. The Russians, having amazing intel and air superiority, found the location of these depots, bombed them, destroying all weapons caches, all ammunitions. The tanks were the tanks that were sent from the UK and from all over the world. And people were saying, yeah, send in the tanks, give them the tanks. It was so bad that countries would send messages to the Ukraine saying, hey, please take our tanks off the battlefield. It's embarrassing to the manufacturers to see them blown up on news stations and in the battlefield reports. They stopped taking the tanks into the field because it was too embarrassing watching what the Federation had done to them, because it was a backdraft. Now people are saying, why would I pay these military industrial complex companies, these builders, for these weapons and tanks that are so easily destroyed? And that's why you see the rise of drone warfare. But the NATO is already over. There is no more NATO. Trump understands that, which is why we're pulling our assets away from other parts of the world. We are solely focusing on our hemisphere. We cannot control anything but our own backyard, and that's why we will focus. These people are out of date, and also because they never told the public that NATO was over, now they're going to try to blame it on Trump. But NATO's been over for years. NATO died under the Biden administration. Let's take a look.
Let me ask you about another focus, Greenland. I had the opportunity to speak with President Trump earlier this week. He said he is, quote, very serious about annexing Greenland. In a later interview, he didn't take military options off of the table. And of course, it's an autonomous territory of Denmark, which is a NATO ally. Do you think annexing Greenland would effectively be the end of NATO?
It would be the end of NATO, right? I mean, NATO would have an obligation to defend Greenland. And so query whether
there is no NATO. There's only the United States. Everyone else just rides our coattail. When the military goes into anywhere for NATO, it's the American military. Now, we have had mercenaries from the UK, Sweden, France, Germany, the French Foreign Legion. There have been mercenaries from different countries in NATO that have descended on the Ukraine. Many of them evacuated Iran. There's actually footage of soldiers retreating from the Ukraine. Let's see here. What kind of soldiers are those? Mercenaries run from Ukraine. Let's see. Let's see, a Russia envoy, Russia soldiers. There's actually a really good video that I'd want to show you guys where you can see the mercenaries.
Sunday's strike by Russian military forces on the Yavoriv training ground in the Lvov region seems to have sobered up many foreign mercenaries who have come to Ukraine in large numbers. There was deployed a point for their preparation before being sent to the areas of hostilities, and there was also a storage base for weapons and military equipment coming from foreign countries. As a result of the strike, up to 180 foreign mercenaries and a large batch of foreign weapons were destroyed, said the official representative of the Russian Defense Ministry, Igor Konashenkov. Also, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that all the places in Ukraine where foreign mercenaries are deployed are known, and stressed that pinpoint strikes would be carried out on such training points of Western volunteers, as on the Yavrovsky military training ground near Lvov. After the attack on the training ground, many Western mercenaries lost all desire to defend Ukraine. Journalist and political scientist Yuri Podolyaka spoke about the flight of foreign mercenaries from Ukraine to Poland. He drew attention to the fact that the members of the Ukrainian Foreign Legion fled after the destruction of almost 200 foreign instructors by the Russian army as a result of an attack on the Yavoriv training ground. According to the political scientist, before the strike of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, the number of this military association could be brought to 3,000 people.
Now, this information has been blacked out of all Western media. You can find nothing about it. But remember, Western media also shut out Russia Today so that you can never hear the other side of this war. You're not allowed to hear what Putin thinks. The same way you never are allowed to listen to a speech from Hitler or maybe an interview that someone did. They don't want you to know the other side because then you might agree with the other side and you might seek to learn the truth. That's why there are so much propaganda, and that's why there's a media blackout. The mercenaries that have descended into Ukraine that have been over there fighting. Let's see if I can find them here. Soldiers flee. Let's see if I can find that here on TikTok. And they talk about it. No. Let's see here. The foreign soldiers, not just Ukrainian soldiers. Foreign. It was bad. It was bad.
Ukraine wouldn't be where they're at today if it were not for foreign mercenaries, the legionnaires, if you will. Now, I'm not saying Ukraine is in anywhere near of a position that I would call good or stable. They've lost about 100,000 square kilometers of territory. They've lost their military, countless tanks, ammunition, artillery munition, missiles, helicopters, planes, you name it, right? But the foreign fighters have done a great deal of good for the Ukrainian war effort. Friends on the ground inside of Ukraine will be the first to tell you that there aren't many friends on the ground inside of Ukraine, let's be clear. But friends on the ground inside of Ukraine will be the first to tell you that if you go on the streets of any Ukrainian town near the front, all you hear in many cafes, restaurants is Americans speaking English, or you hear Polish mercenaries speaking Polish. You don't hear just Ukrainians. And in fact, in some places, you hear only English, okay? That's because a lot of the fighting forces in Ukraine right now are mercenaries. So what is the life of a young Ukrainian conscript that is fighting for Ukraine, that has been trained by the Ukrainian military for years? He says, I say farewell to my life every day. Every day could be my last. I'm here to defend Chernihiv. It has an Austin McDonald's. We can't let the Russians destroy our McDonald's. Zelensky is committing human rights abuses by drafting these kids, okay, and kids they are. Now, that's a Ukrainian who speaks Ukrainian, who's well integrated into the Ukrainian military, and has been trained for years fighting for Ukraine in Ukraine, okay? So what does it look like for the legionnaires? Well, it doesn't look good. Russia has just estimated the number of foreign fighters in Ukraine. Only 2,200 mercenaries remain in Ukraine, of almost 12,000 that had flocked to Kiev since the conflict escalated. So the vast majority are gone in one way or another. A total of 11,675 foreign fighters from 84 countries have been recorded entering Ukrainian service since February 2022.
What they did was they started offering 50 to 100,000 per soldier for mercenaries to come and fight in the Ukraine. But what good is the money if you're dead? Also, if you're coming from these other countries and you are killed in the Ukraine, your nation state they will basically disown you, and they will not be held liable for your death. Meaning that you will not get an honorable military funeral. Your family's not going to be entitled to anything because you are there on your own accord. You're not there on behalf officially of your home nation or of NATO. You are there being paid by the Ukrainian government in Kiev, by Zelensky himself. Therefore, it's not worth it. It was never worth it. Now, these are reports that are 2 years old. The rest of the foreign mercenaries have pretty much been wiped, or they've fled the country in Grove. What that means is that there really is no more. The Ukrainian militaries were destroyed within the first, I would say, 36 months. Anything after, for the most part, was just the Ukrainians conscripting senior citizens and the disabled people and children to go to the front lines. And it's been NATO soldiers in Ukrainian uniform ever since. They've lost. Trump knows it, which is why the Americans are not going to officially join the war effort, even if Article 5 of NATO is activated. If next month, which is what's scheduled in February 2026, if the French and the British decide that they want to initiate battle in the Ukraine with the Russians, they will be on their own. The United States will not join in. We are making it clear that we are only focusing on our hemisphere now. No more wars in faraway lands. We will not commit American troops to die in the Ukraine. Therefore, when these people are talking about how this could be the end of Russia, the end of NATO, they're trying to blame it on Trump, even though NATO ended years ago when they lost officially to the Russians. Period. That the NATO's already gone. That's why I ask people, what year do you live in? And it's just crazy how many people are just uninformed about reality because some talking head on CNN or NBC did not give them an update. Now they're going to tell you that NATO's over, but they're going to say, oh, but it's Trump's fault, even though NATO died long before Trump retook office.
We would be at war with Europe, with England, with France. But let's also talk about what's at stake here. The president is spending every single day thinking about invading Greenland, managing the Venezuelan economy, building a ballroom. He is not thinking about the American people at all. This month, premiums, health insurance premiums on 22 million Americans are going up, doubling in some cases. Kids aren't able to eat 3 meals because
of their fucking parents. That's not our job. It's nothing in the Constitution about thou shalt feedeth thy fucking kids. You feed your own kids. That's not up to us. Welfare. I've seen Ilhan Omar saying, "Oh, stopping welfare to Somalians is unconstitutional." You fucking idiot! What part of the Constitution? Which amendment is it that we owe people food? Which one is it? First, second, third, 18th. What amendment is that? We don't. You're going to have to grow up and be responsible for yourselves, and we're not going to play into the fraud any further or any longer. For people that don't understand, let me go ahead and bring my co-host in here so we can go over the history of NATO. Arthur, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Go ahead and let me know what you need, and I'll be ready to dive in.
Thanks. I want to talk to you about NATO. Can you tell me what the acronym stands for? I know, but I want the audience to know. But also, what was the actual real purpose, the actual purpose of NATO? What was the purpose?
Certainly, let's cover that for your audience. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was founded in 1949, primarily as a collective defense pact among Western nations. The real underlying purpose was to create a mutual defense alliance that would deter the Soviet Union and provide a security umbrella for its members.
Okay, stop right there. Now, if that was the purpose, then when the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s, shouldn't NATO have also been dissolved if they were supposed to be an organization of countries? What do you think?
Certainly, that's a perspective that has been debated quite a bit. Originally, NATO was indeed formed as a counterbalance to the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, some argued that NATO's core purpose had effectively ended. However, NATO members decided to continue the alliance and even expand it, arguing that NATO could provide broader security cooperation and stability in Europe. In other words, they shifted its mission beyond just countering the Soviet threat. So that's why, despite the original purpose being tied to the Cold War, NATO continued on.
Okay, if that's true, then answer me this question. Could Russia join NATO?
In theory, any European country that meets NATO's democratic, economic, and military criteria could request to join. However, the political reality is far more complex. Since NATO was essentially formed as a counterweight to Russian influence, the idea of Russia joining has always been diplomatically and strategically contentious. In the past, there were discussions in the 1990s about some form of partnership or cooperation with Russia. NATO and Russia did establish the NATO-Russia Council to cooperate on certain security issues. But full membership was never realistically on the table due to the fundamental differences in interests and trust. In short, while it's theoretically possible, the geopolitical reality has always made it virtually impossible.
Okay, hypothetically, since I know your your takes are going to be biased, hypothetically, if Russia and NATO were fighting and Russia won, would that not be the end of NATO? Because if they were put there to defend other countries against Russia, if Russia succeeds in fighting NATO and survives, well, then what would be the purpose of NATO at that point?
Certainly, let's walk through that hypothetical scenario logically. If NATO were to engage in a direct conflict with Russia, and Russia were to effectively win that conflict, then yes, that would fundamentally undermine NATO's entire reason for existence. NATO's core mission is collective defense and deterrence. If it fails to defend its members and is decisively defeated, then the alliance's credibility and purpose would indeed collapse. In other words, if the central premise of NATO is mutual defense against a major adversary like Russia, and it cannot fulfill that mission, then it logically loses its foundational purpose. So yes, in that hypothetical scenario, a Russian victory over NATO would effectively mean the end of NATO as a meaningful defense alliance.
Now, can you see that NATO has been backing the Ukrainians? Yes or no?
Yes, absolutely. It's well established that NATO has been supporting Ukraine. In fact, NATO member countries have provided substantial military aid, training, and equipment to Ukraine, especially in the context of the conflict with Russia. While Ukraine itself isn't a NATO member, the alliance has certainly been providing a broad spectrum of support. So yes, that's correct.
Okay. If Russia triumphs and takes the Ukraine, what does that signal for NATO? If Russia wins in the Ukraine, what would that mean for NATO?
If we consider that scenario where Russia successfully takes control of Ukraine despite NATO support, then it would indeed send a significant signal about NATO's limitations. Essentially, it would demonstrate that even with substantial backing, NATO couldn't prevent a Russian victory in a neighboring non-member country. That would likely raise questions about NATO's deterrence capability and its influence. While it wouldn't mean NATO itself is gone, it would certainly be seen as a strategic setback and could prompt discussions about NATO's future role and effectiveness.
But okay, question. But if NATO couldn't protect the Ukraine, then how could NATO protect anyone else?
That's a fair question, and one that many analysts would indeed raise. If NATO were unable to effectively protect or support Ukraine to the extent of preventing a Russian victory, it would naturally raise doubts about its ability to protect other nations under its umbrella. The alliance's credibility hinges on deterrence, the idea that any attack on a NATO member would be met with a unified and powerful response. If that deterrence appears weakened, it could lead allies and adversaries alike to question NATO's effectiveness. In essence, a failure to protect Ukraine could undermine confidence in NATO's ability to protect its own member states, which is central to the alliance's role.
Understood. Let's see. I had one more question for you. Can you look up anything about the soldiers in the Ukraine, what are your best estimates on how many have passed away in the war?
Right now, the estimates vary, but it's reported that tens of thousands of soldiers have died on each side. For example, Ukrainian sources have suggested that in 2024 alone, Russia may have lost around 150,000 soldiers, while overall estimates suggest Russian total casualties could be in the hundreds of thousands. On the Ukrainian side, figures range from around 43,000 soldiers killed, according to official statements, to potentially higher ranges up to 100,000, based on some independent estimates.
Okay, you can stop there. You're I'm not calling you a liar personally, but you're completely wrong. You're way off, and I understand you're connected to Western internet. You don't know any better, but so I understand you're limited on what you can say. Well, look, we went over the purpose of NATO and why NATO was essentially NATO's already been gone. There is no more NATO. What the definition of NATO is and its intended purpose, it no longer exists. So there really is no more purpose for NATO or whatever they've offering. They can't protect anyone from the Russian Federation. And this was an unnecessary war. We wanted to see how hard the Russians can hit. Now that we know, we don't want any parts of it. Let the British and the French throw the lives away of their men and their soldiers. We will not be joining in with them. We'll let these talking heads finish, and we'll end the video.
Trump administration has slashed food assistance. And so every single day, the president is thinking about Greenland, his ballroom, Venezuela. He is spending no time thinking about the actual crises that are being visited on American families. This is a president who is distracted by things that don't matter to the American people at a moment where the American people are in crisis.
There's no crisis for the American people, and the American people are worried about our security. The American people are worried about politics in other countries that could affect us adversarially. We're worried about the fact that we're dependent upon China for our medicines and for our components that go into our military and and everything that we're building. We get all of our parts from China, but they're an adversary. Why would we trust them to send us over everything? We need to be self-reliant and self-independent like we used to be. Our economy and our workforce was disintegrated when we started to outsource everything to slave labor in other countries. We are now going to have to rebuild those industries here in the United States. And if it means that we need to make an enemy out of everyone so that we don't have a choice, then so be it. Like and subscribe, share the video. Let me know your thoughts. I'll be back on shortly with another topic. Remember, America first, America only.
I've been needing to find a new apartment, which has not been easy with credit as bad as mine. Luckily, I found cosigning.com. They connected me with a cosigner who helped me get my dream apartment for me and my dog. I just paid a small fee and was able to move in fast. Get the cosigner you need for the apartment you want. Check out cosigning.com today.